It is November 29th, 1986, and this is Prickly Pears, the Palm Springs Public Library's oral history project, Pioneer Palm Springs. Today we're going to enjoy a conversation with one of those pioneers, Jack Freeman. And let's introduce him now. And there is Jack. Just look at me or look at the camera, either one. We're located at Mr. Freeman's residence on Farrell Drive in Palm Springs. And first, I guess, Jack, I'd like to say thank you for sharing this time with us.
You're certainly welcome.
Tell us something. Let's begin at the beginning and get a little acquainted with Jack Freeman. Where are you from and where did you grow up?
Well, I'm originally born in New York City, was raised in New Jersey, in a small town just outside of Elizabeth, New Jersey. At that time, the population, I guess, was about 1,500. And then schooled there and left at a very early age in Palm Springs and went to work in New York City for a while. And strangely enough, I had ambitions of being a professional prize fighter, which seems rather most unusual today. Not very successful, but made the attempt.
You'd have been one of the lighter weight.
Oh yes, 126 pounds is what I weighed at the time, thinking like all fighters who just begin with the fame and the glory and the tremendous quantities of money. Of course, nothing compared to what we have today. However, I might mention I did, for my first fight, receive the large sum of $10, which was quite a bit of money at the time.
When did you leave the East Coast to come out west?
I left the East Coast when I was about 19 or 20 years of age, and I went to Cleveland, where some of my family resided, my brother, and he wanted me to go into business with him. However, I made the attempt to do that, but I found that it wasn't the thing that I wanted. I might interject here that my brother and I, my oldest brother and I, Al, we made a trip as a vacation out to California, and it always remained in my mind that I would surely like to return there. And when I decided that what he had to offer me was not what I really liked, so I got on a Greyhound bus and came out to California. And I got a job up at Lake Arrowhead.
Lake Arrowhead?
Lake Arrowhead, that's right. And those were pretty rough days, but it was quite a job because I was assured of a place to sleep and a place to eat. I worked for the Lake Arrowhead Club at $60 a month. With room and board in a coffee shop they had up there. And after working there several months, I met a young man by the name of Earl Strebe. I'm sure that most of our viewing audience knows of Earl Strebe. He used to run a little theater there. I guess he was everything, the manager, the owner, and the projectionist. And he used to come into this coffee shop, and we became very good friends. And after I worked up there that full season, and then the following season, Earl and I became fast friends at the time, and he persuaded me to come to Palm Springs because his mother-in-law, Zadie Bunker, the famous Zadie Bunker, who was the flying grandmother, who was known as a flying grandmother, and even had the pleasure of meeting the Queen of England at the time. And she was going to build for someone who she was very fond of, a little pharmacy, and it was going to have a food counter there. And Earl persuaded me to manage the place, run it. Well, managing the place was quite a name.
When would this have been?
This was back in 1934.
34.
34, that's right. 34, yes. And 34 or 33, I'm not quite sure. Nevertheless, this managerial job consisted of cooking, dishwashing, cashiering, waiting, a cleanup man, and just about everything was connected. Yes, it was a one-man managerial job.
Where was this located, Jack?
This was located right exactly where Gucci's is today. So,
and Gucci's, of course, is part of the Fashion Plaza downtown.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And Earl had a theater known as the Village Theater just right behind the pharmacy. Mm-hmm. It was the only theater in town at the time. And
that the Desert Inn would have been right across the street.
No, the Desert Inn was further down the street, south or east.
A little farther south.
Yeah, south. Yes, a little further down. And it was set off of the street. It was a series of cottages. It was a lovely place, lovely place. And I believe Earl worked there when he first arrived in Palm Springs. Now,
so here you were in Palm Springs, managing this little restaurant.
That's right, managing this little restaurant. And in the course of managing that little restaurant, it was a really a nice little place, and became the gathering spot for all of the celebrities that came down. We had a number of them come down, and there wasn't the rooms and the availability of rooming facilities, especially for weekends, because though the Desert Inn and the El Mirador, which opened up just a year before I arrived, it had closed. It was built, I think, in 28, and then closed a year or two after that, and then reopened under the management or ownership of Warren Penny.
And I was going to ask you, when you came to Palm Springs, if there were any other restaurants at that time?
No, there were no restaurants as such, other than in the hotels. The Desert Inn had a very fine restaurant, and the El Mirador had a very fine restaurant. And then there was the Oasis Hotel, where the Sheraton Oasis is now on the back street. What's that?
Bilardo.
Somewhere around there, yes. And they had restaurants. And then there was the Del Taco's Hotel that had a restaurant. But other than that, there were a few coffee shops and a few hamburger places, but that was all.
I think of one that I've heard mentioned often in those days was the Dollhouse. Before it became George and Ethel Streby's up on North Palm Canyon, there was another one, wasn't there?
No, it was. Jane and Don Manchester they built and ran a dollhouse that was actually in a home on Arenas. And they also did tremendous business there over weekends. And then they decided, they bought this property on Palm Canyon and decided to build a dollhouse there. Well, they built sort of a little shack-like thing, and the interior decorations were most unusual. They had sort of a thatched roof. It was built in a Hawaiian or Polynesian style. And they had a little Mexican trio there that was known as the Guadalajara Trio. And it became absolutely famous. And
Guadalajara boys.
That's right. And they just, every night, the whole town, whatever there was of the town, in those days everybody just left their little homes, whatever it was, the doors were open, and they just left and went to the dollhouse. Then drinks were just 50 cents a piece, I think, and they were able to dance, and food was reasonable.
Life was fun in those days.
Yes, life was very, very interesting, very amusing.
Well, how about your own little restaurant?
Now,
was it pretty successful?
Let me tell you the little story how that came into being. Working at the village pharmacy with this food counter, I met a young man there. His name was Irwin Schumann, who subsequently became perhaps one of the finest men in Palm Springs. And not only that, you can attribute a good deal of the success of Palm Springs to Irwin Schumann and, of course, Charlie Farrell. They owe a great deal of thanks to him.
How did you meet Irwin?
Irwin was an accountant. He came here. He was a very sick man. He was recovering from a lung operation, and he had, I guess, tuberculosis. And he used to come in there to eat, and we became very, very good friends. And Irwin was a student of yogiism, and he felt as though that through the philosophy of yogiism and whatever it had to offer, this would help cure him of his ailment. And at the time, he had made a decision to go to India to study yogiism. But before that, we had became, as I say, very close friends, and I said to him one day, you know, it's time Palm Springs had a legitimate restaurant. And he says, yes. He says, it's growing slowly but steadily. At that time, it was slowly but steadily. So I says, if I had money, I'd open up one. He says, well, I've got a little money. He says, where would you put it? I says, just north of the village pharmacy. There was a little place known as the Waffle Shop. There was nothing but hamburgers they sold there. He says, well, could you get that? And I says, I don't know, but this is Zadie Bunker owns this property. And I got to know Zadie very well coming into the pharmacy.
Mm-hmm.
So I got hold of Zadie Bunker, and I told her what my idea was. Well, she says, Jack, I have no money. If you've got money, we might be able to lease you some of this land. So I says, Irwin Schumann, who she knew too, had money, and she says, how much land would you need? So we went outside, and we actually paced off a number of yards that we might need, you know, with our feet. And she said to me, how much do you think you could afford to pay rent? Now this is conversation, you know. It's an odd way of doing business, but in those days we did business that way, by our word. So I said, I had no idea, and she says, I have no idea. So I says, what do you think? So she said, well, would $1,000 a year be too much? $1,000 a year. I got to figuring out what the cost. I says, well, I think that's fair enough. But I says, I couldn't pay the whole thing right now. Well, she says, I wouldn't expect you to. How about dividing it up in 3 parts? When you opened in the fall, you paid 1/3. New Year's, you'll have money from the New Year's business. You'll have another 1/3. And Easter, you'll pay the last 1/3. In that manner, I leased the property from her. To brief the story out, Irwin, I had all the plans drawn up to put up a building. She had no money for that. And Irwin financed the whole thing and actually gave me 1/3 of it. No money at all. Just gave me 1/3 of it. Even in those days, he was such a philanthropic individual, so generous and kind-hearted. And he entrusted me with this whole operation. And he went to India.
So he gave you the whole thing?
Yes, and
you owned 1/3 of it?
No, I owned 1/3 of it.
And he went to India?
And he went to India. He also gave his ex-wife, Phyllis Schumann, 1/3 of it. And she worked at the place. See? And
was this large enough to... well, go ahead.
Oh,
let me
yes,
interrupt.
it was quite... I guess it seated about 140 people. We had a patio. It was a beautiful place. I'm sorry that I just never seem to have taken any pictures of it, and I don't know whether there were any pictures there that anybody else took. However, we did have a reporter, an opening night, as you will see on the menu, the souvenir
was this the
menu.
Chi-Chi, or just...
This was known as Freeman's Desert Grill.
Freeman's Desert Grill?
That's right.
Okay.
Well, 2 years later, a year and a half later, I cabled Irwin. I wanted no more part of the restaurant business. It was too confining. So I cabled him to come on home. Well, he came on home, And I said, Irwin, now this is in 1938, I think it was.
Let me interrupt you just to set the scene. Would Freeman's Desert Grill have been roughly the old Blue Room, which was part of the Chi-Chi?
No. The Blue Room was the Freeman's Desert Grill was only about, I'd say about 40 feet. 40 frontage, yes. And it went back as far as it could go. It was about 100 feet back, maybe 125. And the rest, there was an old hotel known as the Central Hotel, right next door to it. See, which Irwin eventually bought.
Yeah.
And that he tore down and made the Blue Room out of it.
I see.
Then he made what was known as a Starlight Room from an original investment of $26,000, which the place cost to construct and furnish, including the first refrigeration system, commercial refrigeration system in Palm Springs, was at the Chi-Chi.
Must have been an event.
at Freeman's Desert Grill. Now, when it eventually, he had his expenditure over the whole operation was well over $1 million before he got through. He built the Blue Room and then the Starlight Room where he held the entertainment. Now we're sort of skipping from here to there. Now, are there any questions?
Tell us about in between.
In between. Well, then Irwin came back, and as I recall the various things that occurred, what a absolute fabulous man this was. I said to him, well, Irwin, I says, here's the restaurant. He says, I'm sorry, it didn't work out quite as we had planned. He says, what do you want for your third? I says, I didn't pay anything for it. I don't want anything. So he says to me, oh yes. He says, you must take something. He says, but I have no money. And I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to give you a note for $750, which you will cash at the bank. Al Gardner was the manager of the bank. He was a personal friend of Irwin's, and I will pay him every month as a loan. He will cash it for you, so you'll have some cash, and I will give you a $750 due bill so you can eat here as much as you want. And if you're not working by then, you can still eat here. So, however, I had a job already as a meat salesman, representing one of the largest companies in Los Angeles, who happened to be Irwin's uncle.
Oh.
Who owned the place. And they gave me a job as a meat sale, representing him in this area, and I loved it. It was a great thing. And Irwin went on to operate. And this is interesting too, to change the name from Freeman's Desert Grill to the Chi-Chi. There was a young man by the name of Jack Church from Chicago. He wound up in Palm Springs. He was an alcoholic. And he began to patronize shortly after Irwin got there and took hold of the operation. Irwin knew nothing about the restaurant business at all. His only connection with it was having eaten in one of them. And this Jack Church came there, and he was an artist, a caricaturist. He used to paint these caricatures. There may be some around Palm Springs, but these were the most interesting ones. They were all of Mexican peons. And he painted some of these in the patio of the Freeman's Desert Grill. And what he got, and of course, first I must predicate the whole thing. I'm sure the audience know by now what Chi-Chi means in Spanish. And all of the Mexican women had great big bosoms, which were known as Chi-Chis in Spanish. And their men were riding on little donkeys, and these great big bosomed Mexican women were pushing the donkeys. Well, he had these caricatures all over the place. And in the meantime, Jack Church was drinking, drinking, and drinking. He ran up a bill. So Irwin said, I'll tell you what I'll do. From painting all of these in the men's room and the ladies' room, he had these all over, and they evoked many comments.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, we'll call our bill square. And Jack Church says, well, why don't you rename this place the Chi-Chi? And Irwin says, yes, I will. That's how it got its name, Chi-Chi. So how some may think that he got the name Chi-Chi by a picture that he had in the bar, hanging behind the bar, do you?
Oh, yes.
With a beautiful Polynesian girl.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this was given to him by a man by the name of Ray Haller, a former movie star and also the original builder of a place known in Hollywood as the Seven Seas, which was a very famous nightclub at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And Irwin bought or was given this picture, and he hung it behind the bar. And she
was unclad from the waist up.
Unclad from
Mm-hmm.
the waist. That's right.
I remember that picture well.
And he used that as a trademark. He had it on his menus, on his business cards, and on his road signs, and whatever have you.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it got its name, Chi-Chi. Well, a year after that, in 1939, when war was declared in Europe, they built this great big air base down here, the Air Transport Command. Then is when Palm Springs began to take hold. And he changed the original Freeman's Desert Grill into an officers' club.
Oh.
And the rest of it, and he built the Blue Room, and then he built the Starlight Room later, which became world famous, internationally famous, because at that time he was able to hire the type of entertainment that Las Vegas has today. But then they didn't get that kind of money. Las Vegas was hardly anything but one or two places on the strip. His opening act for the opening of the Starlight Room was Desi Arnaz and a 32-piece orchestra, which
I didn't know that.
Yes, which couldn't possibly have been paid for at today's rates.
No.
They'd have probably gotten $250,000.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think he paid him about $3,000 or something like that.
When was that? Do you remember?
That
Jack?
was right after the war was over. He opened up the Starlight Room.
And I'll bet you were there on opening night.
Oh yes, I was. When I got, then I went to the Army back in 1941. I went to the Army, joined the Air Transport Command, and was stationed part of my time, luckily, out here at this base, and lived at home and serving.
Mm-hmm.
And then after a year or so of that, they transferred me to Central Africa, to Ghana,
Oh.
and from there to India. And when I came back, I opened up a meat company. Having had meat experience and knowing everybody around here, I opened up a meat company and became, it was originally known as the Desert Provision Company.
Mm-hmm.
And it became a very, very successful institution. Sold it, retired. This will be a little of a surprise to you. After a short time, opened up with Zachary Pitts, the first commercial linen supply company in Palm Springs.
Mm-hmm.
Had that only a little over a year and sold that. And opened up in San Bernardino another meat company known as Freeman and Foster Meat Company.
Freeman and Foster.
Opened that up. And after a short...
And you used to sell to the restaurants here in Palm Springs.
Oh, yes, sold to the restaurants. We even diversified both in product and in areas, and went as far as Vegas and Lake Tahoe and Reno.
Mm-hmm.
We became quite a prominent subject in the meat industry. Yes. And then after Freeman and Foster sold that and sort of retired, and I discovered this retirement wasn't any good, So I built the Freeman's Meat and Provision Company on Williams Road right here in Palm Springs. There was another incident of doing business without the assist of attorneys. A man by the name of John Williams and his boys still live here. Don Williams inherited John's estate. John originally pioneered out on Williams Road, Williams and all of that commercial area out there just off of Ramon Road. He had bought this, I guess, from the railroad company, a whole town site, perhaps at $20 an acre. And I told him that I wanted to build a plant on Williams Road. He says, go ahead and build it. I said, I've got the money. He says, I'll put the money up, you just go ahead and build it, whatever you want. And he says, I'll charge you 10% of whatever the investment was and give you whatever kind of a lease you want. Get your own builder. And he just gave me carte blanche, paid all the bills, and we built it. We never had a matchbook as a contract until after the thing was done. Then we drew up a lease.
A lot of business was done that way in those days.
That's the way we did business then. And it was a most happy arrangement until I sold that and
finally decided to retire and stay retired.
Oh, incidentally, I might say this. Just before, when I opened up this place on Williams Road, my partner was, very few people knew about this, was the Tropicana Hotel in Las Vegas. And one of its prominent owners, Tom Corrigan, he became a resident of Palm Springs, was my partner. So it was quite a successful arrangement, the whole thing. And then I sold it and decided to retire.
Well, let's go back, Jack, to the years before the war again. And a part of the restaurant business that we hear a great deal about, but nobody seems to have a lot of real information about. And that was the advent of casino-style gambling here in Palm Springs.
We go back to 1934 there. A man by the name of Al Wertheimer came out of Detroit and built a home on Tamarask Road, which he eventually sold to Darrell Zanuck. I don't know who owns it now. He went out to Cathedral City and bought this vast plot of land, 300 acres. And he bulldozed a road where Date Palm Drive is today.
There was no Date Palm then.
There was no Date Palm Drive, and he just bulldozed the road with a bulldozer.
Sort of up from Cathedral City.
That's right. It perhaps was a quarter of a mile from Highway 111.
Well, you would have had to go clear through the Whitewater Channel then.
That's right. Whenever there was a bad situation, a bad rain situation, it was flooded out.
They had put a new road in again.
They had put a new road in. Well, they just closed it up and bulldozed it again when the flood was gone. Well, that, I might mention, also was a great contributing factor to the success of Palm Springs, because when Al Wertheimer went out there and built this very stately looking casino.
Where was it located, Jack? You remember approximately in present day terms?
Just past the bridge, past the Whitewater on the right hand side, where Kmart is today.
Just about where Kmart is? Just about,
a little further down where Kmart was. And this was a very stately looking building. And you approached it, and there were trees and well, it was cactus. It was desert style. And the entrance to it was very impressive. Well, when Al Wertheimer opened up, he had a brother by the name of Lou Wertheimer, who was an associate of Joe Skink, the executive of 20th Century Fox, and he was one of the big boys in the industry. So coming back to Al Wertheimer, when he opened up, between he and his brother Lou Wertheimer, they had invited all the celebrities down as their guests.
Oh, the Hollywood
and housed them for the opening. They both opened up simultaneously. The Desert Inn and the Dunes. They called it the Dunes. Just the Dunes. No other. They didn't say Dunes Casino. just the dunes.
The dunes would have been the one on Date Palm then.
That's right. They opened up simultaneously, and Al Wertheimer invited all of these celebrities there as his guests, including not only did he pay their rental for the opening, which was over a weekend, but they were also his house guests at the club. Well, then the gambling had started. So
were you there opening night?
No, I wasn't there opening night. No, as a matter of fact, no one from town other than like Earl Kaufman, George Robinson, Warren Penny, they were the owners of the Desert Inn and the El Myrtle, and Tom Lips. Only a few of the people, the very prominent people, and they weren't allowed to gamble.
I see.
One of the deals he made, I guess, with the sheriff was that no local people would gamble out there. That's one of the conditions that the sheriff's department allowed him to open, that all the money that was lost out there would come from the outsiders. That meant there would be no protesting by the local people, which was good politics.
Do you remember about when what the date would have been when he opened the dunes?
Exact date I couldn't remember, but it was
close.
In the fall. It would probably be around December sometimes.
In 1930?
1934.
1934.
Yes. And incidentally, you've heard of the Dunes Cafe, didn't you, on the main street? Ruby's Dunes, it was known as. Well, Ruby was part of a three-piece ensemble that worked at the Dunes. He was the violinist or the fiddler. And the Ruby's Dunes was completely equipped when the dunes closed up out there, when the law department decided finally decided it was closed up, and Ruby and Al opened up Ruby's Dunes with all of the furniture that the dunes had out there.
And that was right across the street from the Chi-Chi.
That is right. And that became world famous, incidentally.
I know it did.
And
Ruby's Dunes.
Now there was another gambling house in Cathedral City known as the 139 Club. It was built by a man by the name of Earl Saucer, who had a little gambling house and card room in Indio, and he had a partner by the name of Walter Melrose, who developed Cathedral City. Many names out there.
Very familiar names.
Yes, and Tom Kiley, I'm sure you're familiar with him. He became a confidant, and also he was a trustee for Walter Melrose's estate when he died. His name, many of the streets are named after a lot of the people that were connected with the 139 Club.
Where was the 139 Club located?
Do you know where Angel View Thrift Company is? Right behind there. I don't know whether they still had. They had a little guardhouse out there.
They had a little turret on the roof.
That is right. That is where he had a great old-time prize fighter by the name of Phil McGraw, who stood out there and had a little Tommy gun in case anyone should attempt to rob it. He had a little Tommy gun, and it became also a world-famous place where you went in there. They always had chili and hot dogs. They gave you for nothing, you know, just to come out there. It was a very interesting and delightful place.
And well patronized?
Oh, very busy. As a matter of fact, it's one of the reasons that caused the dunes to sort of give up. They didn't actually give up because of that. They gave up because of the law, but they didn't fight the law.
No.
Because
well, now there was still one more, wasn't there?
Yes, that's known as the Cove. That is where the Elks Lodge is today. It's known as the Cove. It was opened up by a man by the name of Jake Kettleman, who eventually opened up the El Rancho Vegas in Las Vegas. And Jake Kettleman, Frank Portnoy, and what's his name? Cone. I forget his first name. Fellow by the name of Cone. There was three of them opened up, which also became very famous.
I see.
Each one of them, for gambling, they were always busy. people came from all over to gamble there. And by that time, the gates were lowered. By that I mean is the local people were allowed to come out there and gamble.
Did they have entertainment in these places?
They had what?
Did they have entertainment at these casinos?
No, they didn't. The only entertainment was out at the dunes. They had this three-piece ensemble, that's all.
With Ruby?
With rubies, that's right. Now,
well, that was an exciting time.
Oh,
and while all this was going on, you were operating your own restaurant downtown.
Yes. See, I opened up in 1936. I operated it until about 1938 when Erwin Schumann came back, you see.
Did you get to know the operators of these gambling places well
Oh, got to know them personally.
Al
yes,
Wersheimer
because I sold them meat. You see, I got to know them on a highly personal basis.
Well, even in those days then, you were supplying as well.
Yes, I got to know everybody. The moment they came to town and opened up, I knew them because I did business with them.
I see.
You see, and I used to sell Al. Al had his meat. We used to fly his meat in, all show cattle meat from New York City, from Edwards Beef Company in New York. And for the Cove, I sold them. They didn't have any restaurant there. They used to, emulated what the 139 Club was doing, giving away hot dogs and sandwiches and things like that. And also the 139 Club was giving these things away.
Well, how were these people able to operate, Jack? I mean, it wasn't strictly legal to have a gambling casino in California.
Well, I don't... You've dropped something, Bill.
Oh, all right. No problem.
Yeah. No, it was against the law, but through politics of some kind or another, through devious ways, they managed to operate. For me to say anything more, I don't think it would be tactful with that looking me straight.
Well, I have heard that if the sheriff in Riverside planned to come down this way, a few discreet phone calls would be made before he came.
Yes, and we had another influential man down here, which I'm sure you're familiar with, very strong, influential man by the name of Artie Samish.
Yes. Was he part of the Palm Springs scene in those days?
Oh, yes. Yes, he was. Yes, he and Frank Portnoy and Jake Kettleman and Al Wertheimer and all of them were very close friends. And he had a lot to say. He, at that time, ran the state of California between he and Governor Warren.
He was a powerful man.
A very powerful man. His demise had taken place when he mimicked the Senate of the state of California.
They used to call him the secret boss of California.
Well, that's true.
There was a book about him, I think.
Yes, in Collier's Magazine, when his demise came about, in Collier's Magazine, he had on his knee as the whole Senate, whole Assembly of California, state of California, as puppets, and he was the Charlie McCarthy. He was manipulating them, and then Governor Warren had the IRS on him, and they picked up on him. And
well, Phil Boyd said that the town decided they didn't like the gambling anymore and wanted to get rid of it, and they finally went to the state of California to get that done, and got the state to close the place.
In Palm Springs, yes. Yeah. Well, they went and turned to the sheriff's department. They told them to close it. Speaking about Phil Boyd, he was the first manager of the Bank of America in Palm Springs. Did you know that? Yes, I knew Phil quite well. And he also had the Deep Well Guest Ranch, which I forgot to mention. And they served wonderful food out there.
How about in town? Was there any gambling of any sort inside Palm Springs in those days? I've heard the old Howard Manor used to have some down in the basement.
Yes, they did.
It was
for
called
a very
the Colony
short
Club then, I think.
They called what?
The Colony Club, was it?
No, they didn't. They had a place down the basement there, which I'm sure they had, and the walls were painted with. It wasn't Petty that painted it, but someone who emulated Petty, with all these beautiful, shapely girls on the walls as a decoration.
Like Vargas or Petty girls.
That's right, exactly that way. But that was very short-lived. And a fellow by the name of Ray Haller, at the time, the fellow who had this place in, built this place in Los Angeles, which I mentioned before, the Seven Seas.
The Seven Seas.
Yes, that's right. So, but that was very short-lived. And then on the reservation, Jake Kettleman, before he opened up the cove, Jake Kettleman and Frank Portnoy had a little place, a little shack there. They had a little crab game there and a little blackjack game. And they closed that in a hurry.
Were the original ones, the big ones like the Dunes, were they really pretty much like a Las Vegas kind of place?
That was the closest thing to it. I might say that in the interior of that, the decorative motif was very much on the European casino style, like the Monte Carlo. It was done in a very, very elegant fashion. And when he had an affair Saturday night, most everybody came in dress.
I see.
Evening gown and black tie.
It's interesting because you see movies about gambling in the 30s and the 20s, and they're always kind of interesting scenes. Everyone dressed very well. Was that how it was there?
At the Dunes only. At the Dunes only. And I think he discontinued that when the 139 opened up, and it was come as you are.
No. He had a little competition then.
Yes, that's right.
Did they get along with each other?
Well, they did after a fashion. Yes, they did. I don't think there was any congeniality there, but they got along. There were no shooting scrapes or anything of that nature.
Well, that's interesting. People always feel that operations of that type tend to attract representatives of the mob, the national crime organizations. Did that ever seem to occur here, or did many of those people come to town in those days?
Well, I understand there are a lot of those here, but I do think that they come here just to rest and relax. In those days, we did not have that. However, Al Wertheimer, I understand, emanated out of a combination in Detroit.
From Detroit.
Yes, that's right.
It might have been part of the scene.
And let me say this, Al Wertheimer did a great deal for Palm Springs. As I told you, he opened up with an invitation to all of the celebrities. If nothing more, it made them aware of Palm Springs, and that in itself developed goodwill ambassadors.
I see.
And when the town decided to have their first desert circus, Al was the biggest contributor of it. What he did, because I was a beneficiary of that, I sold him, I forget how many tenderloins, which is the best part and the most expensive part of the animal.
Of the steak.
Of the steak, that's right. And I sold him that, and he had them roasted up. He had a wonderful French chef. He had a kitchen with all French chefs there. He roasted them up and sliced them, and they had a little stand, and they gave these sandwiches away. So you can readily see how much he had contributed to that, because the price being right, everybody had it.
Tell me what you remember about Desert Circus in the beginning.
It was
Jack.
a wonderful.
You were always involved, weren't you?
Yes, it was a wonderful occasion, event, call it what you will. All of the local people had partaken of it. Everybody that lived here, and of course a lot of the actors who came down here and stayed at the Racket Club. By this time the Racket Club was open. I think it opened up in '34, and he had one or two cottages there, but he always invited somebody down there. Between he and his partner Ralph Bellamy, who he had bought out very quickly, they brought somebody down, and then they stayed elsewhere, but they partook of the circus. It was a very unique thing, and the whole town, when I say the whole town, I mean everybody, with its 1,000, 1,500 residents, everybody dressed in Western style, and everybody wore the badges or something representing some idea that the Desert Circus had to raise money for something. It
really was a total
another.
Community event.
Total community event, and everybody. This took place for a whole week, They even had what is known as a kangaroo court, and everybody partook of that. They held that, and they used to. There was a fellow by the name. He was the judge, the kangaroo judge, by the name of Leo Fields. He was a great fellow, and he had the capacity to be very entertaining as the master of ceremonies and the judge. And I think Frank Bogart was a judge one time too.
Frank probably was very active in that.
Oh,
with his
he
interest
surely
in horses.
was. Frank had partaken in everything. He had given so much of himself to this whole town at all times. From the time, I guess, he arrived, he was the manager of the El Mirador Hotel, and the opening of the racket club, he was the first manager there. Not the opening, but shortly after, he was the manager there. And I don't know whether many people know it or not, but he was he was the first manager at the Thunderbird Country Club too. And he was really active. It was always Palm Springs with him. He had given a lot, and deserving of the highest accolade that they could give him.
Who were some of the other people who were important to you in those early days?
Charlie Farrell. Charlie Farrell was a great fellow. He also partook of everything in Palm Springs, contributed not only of his money and time, but the club, whenever they had any special event, he allowed them to come there or to use it at their discretion, whatever they needed it for. And he was such a congenial, wonderful man. And Palm Springs owes him a great debt of gratitude too. He had done a lot of public work for it, should he.
I see. How about the visiting people, the celebrities? Where did the visiting celebrities like to stay when they came to town, the movie stars?
Well, the first place was the Racket Club. But before the Racket Club, whatever movie stars came to Palm Springs stayed at the Desert Inn and the El Mirador. Those two places. But they were rather on the conservative side. They couldn't let down their hair as these people were accustomed to doing. So they stayed mostly at the Racket Club. And each year he kept building more cottages.
They drew more business and more people.
That's right. It became really a place of fun, a fun house and a fun club. And
well, I guess you got along pretty well with him.
Oh yes, Charlie was a great friend of mine, and he was awfully kind and generous with me, and but he was that way with everybody. You know, he was really a good guy. He was a good guy.
Well, from what you've said, then you were in the business of providing meat to all the restaurants, even while you had your own restaurant here. Would that be true?
Shortly after.
Or just very shortly after?
Shortly before, maybe a couple of months before, and after. From then until I went to the Army, and then the moment I got out of the Army, I was in the meat business until 10 years ago when I retired.
Until then.
So I had seen everything grow from this little church on the corner where Andreas Road is, I think it's Andreas. And Andreas Road, and there used to be a little church with a picket fence around there. Right on the corner there, across from the village pharmacy.
How about the other part of town, the tennis club down against the hillside?
Oh, that didn't take place until after the war was over.
Oh.
Yes, shortly after the war was over, a man by the name of Pearl McManus built that. No, I'm mistaken. Pearl McManus built it
I thought
just
that dated
before
back
the
to
war.
about the same time as the Racket Club.
Yes, shortly after the Racket Club opened. Pearl McManus and a fellow by the name of Phil Ormsby was the manager, but it was not a success. Then it was sold right after the war was over to a man by the name of Lee Baring, sold or leased, I don't know which, I think it was leased, to a fellow named Lee Baring, who, by the way, was my commanding officer out at the post, out of the Air Force, when I joined the Army.
How about the Del Taquitz Hotel? Do you remember when that started?
Yes, I do. Del Taquitz Hotel, not when it started. It was already here when I got here.
That used to be considered the south end of town, I think.
Yes, that's right. But this is interesting. There was an old movie star by the name of, she was very famous at the time. Her name was Fritzy Ridgway.
Oh.
And she had gone on bad times, and it was bought or picked up at auction, whatever it was, by a man by the name of Tom Lips, who was an attorney, who also was very effective in making Palm Springs a city, converting it from a township to a city.
Mm-hmm.
He was a character.
Were you here when Palm Springs incorporated?
Oh, yes.
You remember much about that event? How it came about?
Not at that particular time. No, I wasn't really interested in that so much. I knew it was taking place, but I wasn't interested in it.
You weren't too politically
No, I wasn't
involved.
politically inclined. However, Tom Lips and Earl Kaufman and Warren Penny and Pop Shannon, who was the owner of the Sheraton, which is the Oasis, which is the Sheraton Oasis Hotel. It was named the Oasis at the time. They created the city. Now, let me see. There's a few interviews there that had a lot of interest, which I can't. Oh yes, yes. This is a very interesting era in Palm Springs. Shortly after the war was over, now the El Mirador was converted into a hospital it was renamed the Torney General Hospital. And
that would have been during the war?
Right after the war, during the war, yes. And we had a lot of people, a lot of soldiers who were on a recuperating list. Most of them were not ill as such, but just recuperating from their, it was known as a rest and relaxation place. Right after they came back from overseas, they wound up here somehow or another. But when the war was over, it reverted back to the Army, to their department, real estate department, and a man by the name of Ray Ryan. Did you ever hear the name of Ray Ryan?
Met him a few times.
Did you really? Well, Ray was he was a fabulous man. And he and a couple of men out of Chicago who owned the Chicago Transit Company, the Fitzgerald brothers, bought this El Mirador Hotel. And they converted it into a real fun place. Ray was a oil man out of Oklahoma, big oil man. However, his hobby was gambling. Only man I knew that would bet $1 million on a football game or whatever he would bet on. And he was he and Bill Holden bought the Kenya Safari Club in Africa.
I remember that. They had built Bermuda Dunes.
Yes, when I was in Africa on my African safari, I stayed at the Kenya Safari Club. And it was a beautiful place. Today, the Arabs own it. A man by the name of Advan Shagagi, I think his name is. You've heard of him. He's the richest man in the world.
Right.
Yes, he came. One of his developments was the Bermuda Dunes Country Club, and also the Palm Springs Mall, where Kmart just recently opened their big place. That belonged to Ray Ryan and a man by the name of Abe Simon. They developed it.
That goes back a ways.
Yes.
How about some of the other people, Jack, looking back to the earlier days? And I'm thinking particularly of a longtime associate of Irwin's, Lou Mobby. When did Lou get involved in the picture?
Lou got, as a matter of fact, I was probably responsible for Lou becoming connected with Irwin Schumann. Lou was operating a place in Riverside as a manager there, and he was a very capable and talented man, very capable in the business. And Irwin was in an expansion program then. He was building he bought the Pig and Whistle chain. and he renamed, I don't recall whether he renamed this restaurant here the Chi-Chi, but he built several pig and whistles, and he gave Lou a job as managing first in Riverside, then he brought him down here. Then Lou left and managed the Howard Manor for Dave Margolis in its heyday. Lou made a really, I think, a era of most success that the Howard Manor had attained, which was a fun place too at that time. Lou was the manager of it.
Remember that.
Did a good job.
He had a long history in the restaurant business here.
Yes, he has.
Still, he's active.
Hmm?
He's still active.
Yes, he's still active.
busy.
Yeah, that's right. Lou is a very nice man. And
You know, I think of another thing too from the old Chi-Chi days, and I can't resist mentioning this. There is still one part of the old Chi-Chi that survives. And not many people are aware of it, but if you go up to the Riviera Hotel, which Erwin Schumann built, of course,
yes,
and created,
yes.
out by the swimming pool, you'll see a couple of carved statues.
Oh,
And
yes.
those statues used to be on each side of the stage at the old Chi-Chi.
At the old Starlight Room,
In the old
that's
Starlight
right.
Room.
When he sold the Chi-Chi, whatever was left of it, I just forget how the transaction, how the dissipation of the main Chi-Chi, he took those statues.
He took them and put them by his,
And
not
put
the
'em-
swimming pool, but the pond at the main entrance to the Riviera Hotel.
Well,
The statues are out in front there.
yes, that's right, that's right.
And the town didn't like them. They had a
And
little
yes,
to do
that
about
is right. I was just going to mention
he won that argument.
the town objected to the stark nakedness, you know.
That's right. What else do you remember about those old days, Jack, that was kind of interesting and exciting to you? What did you do for fun?
Oh, what I did for fun? You see, my fun days were somewhat limited because of I was married. I got married. But my fun was doing business with all of these institutions. I was the predominant supplier of all the places in Palm Springs. And
So you knew all the
I
restaurateurs.
knew all them, knew the owners of them, and apparently they favored me to the point where I had access to these places and went there, and it was, and I did all my entertaining there.
You must
know?
have known Ruby pretty well.
Oh, Ruby. I knew him when he was a fiddler out at the
Yeah.
Dunes. We were very good friends. Yes, I knew him when he first came to town. You see, I knew everybody when they first came to Palm Springs, because when I first came here, there was less than 1,000 people, much less than 1,000 people. And I think, if I remember correctly, there were less than 500 registered voters in Palm Springs. And Indian Avenue when I got here was just oiled. And Ramon Road wasn't built yet. Chino Canyon wasn't bulldozed yet. Most of these streets here were all sagebrush and cactus, and there was only one golf course here. There was a half a golf course, O'Donnell Golf Course,
O'Donnell.
9 holes, which is still here.
There used to be an old golf course at El Mirador, I believe, but that didn't last a long time.
I don't recall.
But I
that.
wanted to ask you about another restaurant that several people we've talked to have mentioned, or at least a kind of playground. It was called the Cane Breaks.
Oh yes, the Cane Breaks. Well, that was short-lived. That was again Don Manchester and Jane Manchester. I believe they opened. I'm not too sure. They had their bar on planks, wooden horses, and they had the bar on planks. It was way out there. I can't give you the exact.
Somewhere out, I think it was out near the where Sunrise and Vistacino would be.
Around that area,
somewhere in that
yes.
neighborhood.
Yes, and it was a fun place, and I think it was a dirt floor, if I'm not mistaken. It wasn't, it was a very makeshift place. Yes, it was. Much that I have told you, there was so much that I had omitted because I either cannot recall or it wasn't as, in my memory, it wasn't as implanted there as some of the incidents that I remember.
Sure.
Unless I'm led into it, I can't recall it.
How about things, some of the services around town that would have perhaps been important to you? Police department, for example, you would have
known
had to
every
depend
single
on them a
one of
little
them. I
bit.
remember when there was no police department. when by the man by the name of Bill, his name escapes me at the moment. He was a deputy, and
Riverside County Sheriff's
yes,
deputy?
that's right. And we had no fire department other than voluntary fire department. No free delivery mail service. Our post office down here, and this is interesting. Where the El Morocco Hotel is, you know, that was the center of town that had the phone service there. They had one of these plug pushboard, and a girl by the name of Margaret used to run that during the daytime, and I suppose they had someone else at night, but this was a one-plug phone company.
A one-plug phone company.
Today it's, of course, the hub of many long-distance areas from all over the country.
Well, the El Morocco was the site of another well-known restaurant for a long time.
Yes, it was. Well, Larry Perina's came in later, though. A fellow by the name of Bill Udy had a little restaurant there where he served German-type food, which was excellent.
And Perina's didn't start until much later.
Yes, that's right. Larry Perina was a ball player, you know, from up around Sacramento. And I'm not Sacramento. Maybe it was up there. I don't really know. And he came down and opened up this Larry Perina's, and he was a character. He was a very interesting character and very well liked. And surprisingly, his food was excellent. He served excellent food,
he was
Italian
well known for
style.
That, but then you became pretty well acquainted with the fellows on the police force when they finally developed their own police department.
I had a very personal relationship with Gus Ketman and Bob White. I don't know whether Bob White's still alive.
Yeah, Bob's still. I talked to him a few days ago on the phone.
I haven't seen Bob.
He's going to do an interview like
time.
this one with us one
Is that
of these days.
right? Well, you tell Bob hello. He's a very wonderful chap, very fine chap. And Vivian, his wife, I knew them very well. I knew everyone but the one we have at present, Kendra. I haven't had occasion to meet him yet.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
Well, Jack, this has been a very interesting conversation.
Well, I hope some people will gather some pleasure out of it.
We've talked about some things that we really hadn't talked about with anyone else, though. The restaurant business and how it grew and developed in the city, and some of the well-known restaurants in those days, the people who operated them, and the gambling in Palm Springs when it existed.
Yes.
We hadn't had a chance to find out too much about that, and now we know a little more.
Well, I wish you were able to lead me into some of these interesting things. There's a lot of interesting things happened at the dunes.
Oh, I'm sure there would have
Oh,
been.
yes, there was.
But we thank you for being with us.
Well, I was certainly happy to be able to do this, and I hope everybody who sees it enjoys it.
I'm sure they will. Because I've got it on it.
Oops.